Hey everybody, it is You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week my first question comes from Jacob Dungan, who says, "Hey Steve, I had a question that came up through a conversation I was having with my Christian mother. Let's say I have someone I've been friends with for around 10 years. Through some random act of chance, I never had any documentation of this person's existence. Photos, letters, Facebook posts, or similar things. And that this person had to go into witness protection, thereby necessitating that they essentially had all traces of them erased. Obviously, that person is still alive somewhere in the world, but assume that you don't have the resources to find them yourself. If someone were to question whether this person actually existed, how would you be able to go about proving to them that this person did actually exist? And as something I thought of, how would this be any different than someone proving that God actually exists?" Well, that's a really interesting thought experiment. I suppose if I accept the conditions of your question, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to prove, especially to a very skeptical person, that the person in question, the person in witness protection, actually existed. I think the difference between that kind of a claim and a God claim is that if any God that you are arguing for the existence of is so easy to ignore that it is analogous to a person being spirited off into witness protection, then I would have to sort of ask the Carl Sagan dragon in the garage question, which is, what is the difference between that God and no God at all? You know, aren't we just basically arguing pure philosophical stuff at this point that couldn't possibly have any bearing on real life? If you're talking about a God who is undetectable, like a person vanished from witness protection, what is the practical concern? Why should anyone care whether such a God exists or not? Because, see, the Christian God is not that kind of a God. The Christian God, to hear Christians tell it, and if we accept the accounts in the Bible, leaves his fingerprints on everything. He interferes in human affairs all the time, or at least he did at one point back in the times depicted by the Bible stories. God was not a remote, undetectable being. He was always doing stuff. He was, as Aaron Ross said, he put his hand into our world, and when he pulled it out, it should be dripping with physics. There should be massive amounts of objective empirical evidence for this God, and there just isn't. So that would be one difference between the typical sort of Christian God claim and what you describe in your question. Got that funk? What are your thoughts about genetic editing? The ethical considerations of experimentation are one thing, but what if it can be honed to the point where it was seen to work reliably and favorably for the individuals? Would that be sufficient? It seems to me it would take several generations of reproduction to really know if there are more long-term ramifications. The other consideration that makes me shudder is, within the same realm, is designer babies. If editing meant selecting and deselecting desirable or undesirable traits, would we be living in Gattaca within about 40 years? You raised some good points. My reaction to your question is to notice that I am probably the kind of person who would enable, like, the genetically engineered apocalypse to happen, because I am so naturally sort of optimistic about science and progress. I'm the type of person who, when they say, "Hey, we built the super intelligent robot," I would say, "Oh, awesome!" I would be one of the boosters. I'd be one of the people that enabled it. If they come up with like the reliable, safe, beneficial genetic editing technique, I'm the one who's going to be like, "Oh, great, awesome," because I see all of the happy consequences of it, and I minimize or just don't notice the potential horrible consequences of it. So all I can say is, every time this sort of thing happens in a movie, it goes horribly, horribly wrong. So if we do bring about an era of designer babies and genetic editing, and then it does all completely go down the shitter, we can't say that we didn't warn ourselves. Terry James, do you think comedians are too sensitive to being criticized? I don't advocate people being censored for their material, but it seems certain comedians think that they are above criticism and use the PC card too liberally. I think what you're getting at is, the Jerry Seinfeld thing where he says he doesn't want to perform at colleges anymore because the crowds are too PC, the crowds are too sensitive. That, I think, is being a little oversensitive on the part of the comedian, because comedians have been telling jokes about potentially offensive subjects and finding ways of taking really sensitive, potentially offensive topics and making jokes about them and making them funny while being edgy and being sort of out there and skirting the edge of good taste for generations. Carlin did it, Chris Rock did it, and Chris Rock is another one who said that he doesn't want to perform in colleges anymore, although for different reasons than Seinfeld. But Chris Rock has done it, Dave Chappelle has done it, Amy Schumer is doing it right now, Louis C.K. has been doing it for years. Lots of comics. Patton Oswalt is another one. Lots of comics have been dealing with potentially explosive material and finding ways to make it funny, even if they know that their audience might be sensitive or might be inclined to be offended by the material that they're doing. They have found ways around it. They have been talented enough and brave enough to be able to construct legitimately funny, satirical, artful material around potentially troublesome topics. And if Jerry Seinfeld can't do that, that's his problem. I don't think it's the audience's fault. And I mean, I don't think he's complaining about the audience heckling him or the audience giving him shit on stage. He's complaining about the fact that the audience don't like his jokes. And that's just, again, I think that is part of the contract between the performer and the audience. I think they have to give you the respect to hear out your performance, or at least to not disrupt your performance. But they don't owe you laughs. They don't have to get the jokes. They don't have to like the jokes. They don't have to think the jokes are funny. And if you can't handle that, that's on you. That's not the audience's fault. Joseph Fabiano, hey Steve, I have a bit of a philosophical question for you. The more I hear the word virgin, the more ridiculous I think it sounds. I feel as though it's used as a label in modern society, and I greatly oppose many of the implications attached to it. For example, a lot of people seem to think that if you haven't had sex, you're innocent and pure. I've never had sex, but I'm neither of those things. I simply have non-neurotypical tendencies that impede my social skills. Another annoying and, I think, destructive cultural construct is the idea that you can't be a real man until you've had sex for the first time. I live on my own, I go to college, I have a full-time job, and I support myself entirely. I'll be damned if I'm not just as much of a man as my sexually experienced counterparts. I believe that if we as a society stop using the word virgin and stop making such a big deal out of it, we can remove the stigma and teach people who haven't yet had sex not to be ashamed of themselves. Do you agree with this? Oh, I definitely agree with it. I think you're right on. I do think we should remove the stigma of virginity for a lot of reasons. I think you hit on some really key points. People who have not yet had sex, especially girls, are looked at as being pure, you know, as being the adjective virginal, you know, like there's some sort of, there's an innate moral superiority to being a virgin, and I think that's wrong. I think that's unfair. I think it's an unfair burden to place on people to make them feel like, again, this seems to happen mostly with girls, to make them feel like if they have sex, then they've done some horrible wrong. You know, if they've had consensual sex with a partner that they want to have sex with, and it's a totally normal, healthy thing, that if they've done it outside of a church-sanctioned marriage, that they've committed some horrible sin. I think that's completely unfair. It gives people a lot of extra baggage based on nothing that they just don't need. And the other thing you mentioned about how again, this is mostly for guys, I think, the pressure to go out and get laid. That if you're a guy and you're of a certain age and you haven't had sex yet, that you're defective somehow, that you're not a real man, as you say in your question. That also is really, really destructive and really unfair. And again, just a lot of mental baggage to put on people that just is unnecessary. And I know that the gender line that I'm drawing there is not completely is not a solid line. I know that there are girls who experience what I'm saying guys typically experience, and there are guys who experience what I'm saying girls typically experience. But I think in general, things kind of shake out in those ways, where girls are encouraged to stay a virgin as long as possible because because of their purity, and guys are encouraged to go out and get laid because that's what makes you a real man. And both of those, I think, are toxic. Both of those, I think, we would be better off without, because they both create stigmas of their own kind. And they make things more complicated than they need to be. And you are completely right. Whether you are a man or whether you are a moral person or an adult or whatever, it should not be judged on the basis of whether you have had sex or not. That is a very personal choice that people should do when they are ready with people that they want to do it with, and it should have no bearing whatsoever on whether or not you're considered an adult or a self-sufficient, autonomous person, or certainly a moral, ethical person. It should not be a factor at all. Randy Owens. Hey Steve, both last week's 6'5" filmmaker question and this week's writing question have me wondering which you think is of greater benefit, consuming good media to see how it's done, or consuming bad media to see how it should never ever under any circumstances be done. A while ago, I would have very much thought the former, but over the past decade, I've learned an awful lot from painstaking emphasis on the pain, deconstruction of some very bad books, Fred Clark's Slacktivist, Left Behind, and lately movies too. Both have their place, of course, but which would you think is better? I think it depends on what kind of analysis or what kind of examination you're doing. I think if you are looking to improve a particular skill of your own, then I think it's more beneficial to look for good work, to look and see what good writers do, what good screenwriters do, what good filmmakers do, and try to emulate that at first, and then sort of make it into your own thing and incorporate it into your own style eventually. I think looking at good work can be more helpful as far as that goes. But yeah, you're right, looking at bad work, looking at shitty movies, reading shitty books, and seeing what not to do can be incredibly instructive. If you watch movies, and I'll just use movies because that's my thing for the most part, if you watch movies critically, you can learn something from any movie you watch, whether it's a great film or whether it's a complete pile of shit. If you look at things critically, with a critical eye, and you're able to analyze things, and you're able to figure out and articulate what the filmmaker is doing, whether you think what he's doing is right or what he's doing is wrong, either way, you're able to learn something from watching that film. And the same thing would go from reading books or listening to a piece of music or whatever. Requinix17, question, do you think that the common claim women earn 77 cents on the dollar compared to men claim is true, or do you think it is bullshit? Have you researched this? Do you agree or disagree that any wage gap between men and women is primarily due to sexism? It's true if you understand what the statistic is. The 77 cents on the dollar statistic, I looked it up before I sat down here. The figure I found was 78 cents on the dollar, so it's a little smaller. But according to the Department of Labor statistics, women earn 77 cents on the dollar compared to men when you are comparing average median income between men and women. And if that's the comparison you're making and you understand that that's what that statistic is saying, then it's a statistical fact. There's no denying it. Now, what people say it debunks the wage gap is they try to get a more direct comparison between the two. For instance, instead of just comparing median incomes, they would say, well, let's compare what people make if we only compare men and women who both work 40 hours a week. And then the gender gap shrinks a bit. And if you factor in different other things, you can usually get it down to around, instead of a 77 cents on the dollar gap, it's more like 90 to 95 cents. But no matter what, there is always a percentage less that women make, and many people, including myself, would suggest that perhaps that unavoidable, irreconcilable gap is due to sexism. And I would say probably a great deal more than that is due to sexism as well. There are a lot of cultural factors in play that affect why women make less than men. So I do think the gender gap is real. I do think the gender gap is statistically established. It's a lot more complicated than just saying 77 cents on the dollar. I mean, that's a good sort of general figure. That's a good way of getting people's attention and stating the problem in the broadest possible sense. But, you know, the gender gap varies depending on what racial class you're in. It's better for white women. It's apparently a lot better for Asian women. It's a lot worse for black women. Black women have a much larger gender gap than white women do, or Asian women, or women. Hispanics also, it's much worse than white women or Asian women. And the difference between, I guess, someone like me and someone who is more skeptical of it is whether or not you think it's something that we should try to do something about. And I think it's definitely something that we should try to do something about. Secular Scholar, hi Steve, I'm really missing Allie now. For whatever reason, I'm feeling the pain of her loss now more than ever. I guess it might be an example of absence makes the heart grow fonder, coupled with the lack of ever being able to see her again. It's a low, throbbing pain, nothing intense, but definitely more constant. Your thoughts? I try to think back on times in my life when I've experienced grief comparable to that, and I mean, the only death that ever really hit me really, really close was the death of my grandfather, my pap. And, you know, the acute sense of loss fades with time, but that sense of loss, at least in my experience, never goes away. And I do think that it goes from sort of an acute sense of really, really immediate grief, where you just feel sad and just really awful. And then it goes into more like what you describe as just kind of a low, kind of throbbing pain that's always sort of with you, even if it's not always disruptive to your everyday life. And it just kind of goes from there. Eventually, I think it'll probably just settle in. It'll just be something that is always kind of with you, because when someone you love dies, they're always with you in your mind. And the pain of not having them is always with you. The thing that I always think of, that I'm always aware of when I think of my pap, is he died in 2004, so it's been over 10 years since he died. And I was an adult when he died, obviously. I'm 35 now. I was 24, not yet 24 when he died. So I was a grown-up when he died. It wasn't like I lost him as a child. But it still doesn't feel normal to not have him here. It still feels wrong that he's not here, even though I don't go to his house now expecting to see him. It's not like that. I'm not shocked when I'm reminded that he's gone. But when I think about it, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like everything is where it should be, that he's not here. And I think I'm always going to feel that way. And I mean, I hate to think about these sorts of things, but I think when my grandmother dies, it'll be the same. And hopefully a long time from now, when my parents die, it'll feel the same. It'll never leave me, because these are very important people to me. And yes, it will be an acute, hard pain at first, and then it'll sort of evolve into something else, but it'll always be there. I think that's what you're feeling for Allie. I think it's just something that it will never leave you, because you loved her so much, and it just doesn't feel right that she's not here. I wish there was something that could be done to take the pain away and leave you with your memories of her and your love for her, but I don't really think that's the deal. I think we're kind of stuck with this. Ahoy Yerno, movie and atheism question. I don't think there is life after death, and this makes me sometimes uncomfortable with gratuitous violence in movies, especially when people die. For example, a random explosion where 3 random cops are blown away is 3 lives lost permanently for no reason. And movies don't give any second thought. Sometimes, but not always, this takes away from enjoying movies. Do I overthink? What's your view? I think for me it depends very much on the movie, and specifically on the tone of the movie. If a movie has an irreverent tone, or if the movie is just sort of big and dumb and cheesy, like one of the Rambo movies from the '80s, where Rambo, like especially First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 3, both of those movies, like Rambo kills so many people. And the body count there doesn't really bother me that much because the movie, I don't think, has any reverence for those deaths. There are some movies, though, where the deaths are... The tone suggests that the death should be taken seriously. The tone suggests that a certain gravity should attend the death of characters, but you get the feeling that the movie's heart isn't really in it. You know, like it's just sort of a cheap trick. Like the movie has killed people because it just wants to take a shortcut to making you feel something. That actually offends me more than I think the kind of thing you're talking about, where the movie just sort of blows people away and it's indifferent to it. And it depends on other things too. If a movie is really skillful, if a movie is really well directed or well shot or well acted, or the action is really well staged, I'm more forgiving of the sort of gratuitous violence and gratuitous death. But if the movie is sloppy, if the movie's lazy, if the movie's just bad all around, I'm probably much more liable to notice that it's just picking off characters left and right, or it's blowing up cop cars and not paying any attention to the presumed loss of life. Like, I understand what you're saying, and I do feel that way about certain films, but it just depends on the movie to me. It depends on the tone, it depends on how I feel about the movie overall. Sometimes that kind of gratuitous violence and gratuitous death really, really bothers me and can take me out of the movie or really lower my estimation of a movie that I probably don't like that much to begin with. And other times it doesn't really bother me at all. It just depends on the movie. It's like when you hear that thunder sound effect, sometimes I have something kind of witty to say, and sometimes I don't. It just depends on which episode of You Had to Ask you're watching. Like, for instance, this is one of the ones where I literally have nothing to say. No cleverness left in me. So I'm just going to say that that sound means that it is now time for...
The Lightning Round. Rapid-fire questions. Glib and adequate answers.
Winford Lee. Okay, lightning round question. What do you find more annoying, crotchety old people or bratty entitled children? Crotchety old people, because at least I can say that the children don't know any better. The old people know better, they just don't give a fuck. Sam Clemens, RIGL. Besides the shirt, pen, and your mandatory hat, not to mention the Breakfast Club coffee sip, do you have any other daily or otherwise regular rituals? Ashley and I have breakfast together almost every morning, and it's usually the same breakfast. I will cook her an egg in a basket, and I will have 2 eggs over medium and 2 pieces of buttered toast. And we have orange juice and we have coffee. So I guess that's the closest thing to like a daily or almost daily ritual that we have. Varmint Coyote lightning round question. So MRAs confuse history with their self-serving, misogynistic post hoc rationalizations? Yeah, but they confuse reality with their self-serving, misogynistic post hoc rationalizations. It's not just history. It's pretty much everything that doesn't fit with those rationalizations. Nagesh Kandal. Hi, Steve. So again, if you really had to choose piano or guitar, why? Also, what kind of music are you into? Thanks. If I had to choose, I'd choose guitar because most of the music that I'm into, not all of it certainly, but most of it, most of the popular music is guitar-based. And if I'm going to learn how to play an instrument, I might as well learn an instrument that will allow me to play like some Bruce Springsteen songs, you know, or some Bob Dylan songs, or some Neil Young songs, or some old blues songs or folk songs. I mean, there's a lot of music that I like that is primarily sort of built around the guitar. Most popular music of today is built around the guitar. Radical Bacon, would you ever want to hike the Maryland leg of the Appalachian Trail? Maybe late summer so your allergies aren't too bad? Are you asking me on a hike date? Because I'm married. I don't know if my wife would be cool with that. But, you know, she wasn't in the picture. No, I would actually... yeah, that sounds nice, actually. I've never actually hiked the Appalachian Trail for any, like, significant length of time. That sounds really cool. I don't know if we would ever do that. But it's a nice idea. I love to go for hikes. I love to go for walks. The Godslayers, such safe, bland questions there. I picture a bunch of old ladies sending in those questions. Okay, douche, here's a hard one for you. How many times should I wipe my ass after taking a watery shit? Don't you love that this is the idea that some people have of a serious question or a difficult question? I can't tell you how many times, because it depends on you and on what you've done. Don't you know that you look, you wipe and you look. And if you have to wipe again, you wipe again, and then you look. And if it's clear, then you're done. I don't need to tell you how many times. It's what? I'm going to say 4 times? It depends. You just look. Beth Ann Swan. Hi, Steve. I'm 17, and next year is my senior year of high school. Last summer, I had a fast food job for about a month before having to quit due to lack of transportation. But the job also made me so anxious that I would cry and throw up before every shift and shower 3 times a day to cover the smell. Do you think that all teenagers should have jobs? Should I feel guilty about not wanting another summer job? Thanks. Oh, good God, no, you shouldn't feel guilty if that's what it did to you. If it gave you such stress that you were throwing up and having to take showers 3 times a day, no, of course you shouldn't feel bad. If you don't want a job and your parents aren't making you get a job, I don't think you should have to have one. I don't really see the point when saying like, well, all teenagers should have jobs. What the fuck do I care? If you like having a job, have a job. If you have to have a job, I guess suck it up and have a job. If you don't want one and you don't need one, why the fuck have one? I'm fine with it. You have my approval for not wanting to have a summer job. MK Bones. Hey Steve, I'm a gamer and I'm just wondering, are you excited for Fallout 4? Well, I'm not a gamer, so I'm not excited about it at all. But I have friends who are gamers who have led me to believe that the impending release of Fallout 4 is the most important thing that has ever happened. Like, I've witnessed some of the excitement in my gamer friends about Fallout 4 the last couple of days, and it seems like they're more excited for it than Star Wars fans were when Episode 7 was first announced. So that's big. That's a lot of excitement. That's a lot of collective nerdgasms. So no, I don't care because I'm not a gamer. But yes, I am given to understand that it's a pretty exciting deal. So good for you guys. Hey, that's it for the questions. Before I get out of here, I'm going to give somebody a shout out as always. I can't talk. I'm just so excited for the shout out. The shout out this week goes to Catie Brotherton. Now, you may know Catie as the wife of Johnny B. Secular, who is on the Secular Syndicate and Atheist Analysis channels. But I only say that so you'll sort of have a frame of reference for who Catie is. I don't say that to diminish Catie as an individual at all, because she certainly stands just fine on her own right. Her channel is really, really cool. She has her own point of view, her own points of interest, her own things that she likes to talk about. And she has the main show on her channel for about the last month or so. She started doing a regular hangout series called the Catie Connection, and she talks about atheism. She was raised in a Christian home. I think her father was a pastor, so she has that experience to draw from, and she talks about secular parenting. She talks about the atheist community. She talks about being a person who is an atheist now, coming out of a religious background. She's just a really interesting, insightful person, and a really wonderful person to listen to, and a great point of view to have as a part of our atheist community. So I cannot recommend highly enough to you the YouTube channel of Catie Brotherton. Check it out. I don't think you will regret it. How was that? Did that sound too car salesman-y? Anyway, that's it, everybody. I'm done. I'm through. I'm out of here. I'm not going to do this again for another week. I'm sure we can both maybe be grateful for that in some level. Please leave a comment on this video and ask me your question for next time. And you can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. And I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So until the next video, take care, everybody.